Nobody at the end of that fourth round was like, I wonder how the fifth round's going to go.
Exactly.
I really need to see another 5 minutes of this to determine who is the better and more accomplished and more talented and skilled fighter here. Like, yeah, it's
when Dean said, he was like, man, if Rocky had come out and gotten a fifth round knockout, we'd all be saying how smart her corner is.
I would absolutely not be saying that.
I don't know if it was when she spit out 4 of her teeth, or when she uttered the words, I'm done, I want to be done, please God, don't make me go back out there. But I knew then that she had it in her to win this thing. Welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Dr. Patrick Lyman. And this week, we have UFC 224. We have Kamaru Usman versus Damian Maia. We have Vasily Lomachenko versus Jorge Linares. It was a weekend full of professional, organized violence. And we have a lot of it to talk to you about, in addition to what's coming up from the UFC next week. First things first, we're going to try and get through most of what we found interesting about UFC 224. And despite how uninteresting this card really looked on the surface, it did deliver some pretty compelling action, I think, pretty much throughout the entirety of the card. So we're going to do a bit of a fight smorgasbord for y'all. We're going to talk about the main event, of course, Amanda Nunez defending her bantamweight title for the second time against Raquel Pennington. We're going to talk about Gastelum versus Jacare in the co-main event. We're going to talk about John Lineker, surely, and his knockout of Brian Kelleher. Lyoto Machida did the damn thing. I mean, everything that could have been sad about this card was somehow much less sad than it should have been, except for the main event. And I guess that is where we will start. Obviously, Pat, Nunez Pennington was essentially the last thing, at least for my watching schedule, was about the last thing to happen on this Saturday full of violence, and it left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. What about you?
Yeah, I would put it this way. I don't think there was anybody who, after watching the first 4 rounds of that fight, thought, you know what we really need here is a 5th round between Amanda Nunez and Raquel Pennington to show us once and for all who is the better fighter. Like, the fight was effectively over at that point. We all had a pretty good sense for what was going to happen. Now, some people are going to say, well, was there a chance that Pennington, if they'd sent her back out there, could have come back and won the fight? Sure, absolutely. Nothing is impossible. But it was a very slim chance, and that slim chance was not outweighed by the much more likely chance of what actually happened, which was Amanda Nunez getting her to the ground and then beating 7 shades of shit out of her until her blood spurted all over the canvas. Maybe took a year or 2 off her life. So
yeah, and it was. I mean, I can understand. I can understand some frustration, or I can understand it being difficult to grasp how the fight ended up being as uneven as it was, because tactically speaking, Pennington was in it for most of the bout. She was landing shots consistently. She was firing back. She wasn't lying down. She was doing everything she could. But there was a severe athletic disparity between these two women. It really ended up looking like a very skilled hobbyist versus a true professional. Because when Amanda Nunez hit Raquel Pennington, the difference in force was like, you could not... The fight became the kind of fight where Nunez knew she could just take whatever Pennington threw at her and just hit her at the same time and clearly win the exchange. And there's very little coming back into a fight like that. You can be as precise as you want, you can be as accurate as you want, you can have beautiful timing and all of these intangibles that are supposed to make up the gap between the less athletic fighter and the more athletic fighter. It just, there's nothing you can do.
There was nothing wrong with Pennington's approach here, right? Like, she did more or less what she was supposed to do.
I mean, I would probably critique what her game plan coming into the fight. I mean, I think it was always going to be difficult for her to execute because of that disparity. Like, no matter how smartly she approached this, she's going to take one counter from Nunez and it's going to really change how much she's willing to put into her shots and everything. I really would have liked to see more pressure from her. I would have liked to see her forcing the clinch more often. I mean, she got herself back into the fence like right away, which is kind of the worst place to be against Amanda Nunez.
Do you not think that it was the kicks of Nunez that took away her mobility, or do you think it was? Yeah,
sure, I think the kicks definitely had an effect. Although I think if you're preparing to fight Amanda Nunez, you got to think like she's going to try and kick me in the legs. It's literally all she did in her last fight. So I have to push her back right away so she can't let those kicks go. Mm-hmm. But again, it was a hard hill to climb because Pennington was just like, it was clear as soon as they started connecting on one another, there's a difference. There was a profound difference between them.
And a profound difference in speed and a profound difference in explosiveness and strength too, as soon as they tied up. I think you're right. Yeah. It would have been nice to see Pennington pressure a little more, but Nunez is really hard to pressure. Because her footwork, when you come after her, tends to be pretty good. Like when you leap after her and throw a combination, she tends to move in straight lines. Yep. If you try to walk her down, suddenly she shows off this really nice, tight, circular footwork and cuts really nice angles
like
and gets
at McMahon.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And in bursts against other fighters, like when Rousey briefly tried to pressure her, you could see Nunez's circular footwork come out there. Not so much against Shevchenko because Shevchenko did not really try to pressure her. But here, the couple of times that Pennington came forward, she just got nothing going. Like you would have to be, I think, a really excellent pressure fighter you would have to be Chris Cyborg, I think, to effectively and consistently push Nunez back.
Yeah, pretty much. So, we can talk about the matchup as it played out, like what we can take away from it from Nunez. I guess just we'll give our final thoughts on how it ended. I want to say this. There have been a few people, I mean, the immediate reaction of almost everyone online, at least, to the way this fight ended was somewhere between discomfort and disgust. And most people were like, I didn't need to see that at the very least. And then it was like the day or two after that people started to come out and with the revisionist counter takes with, Tisha Torres came out and supported the corner and Rocky herself said she supports what the corner did. And Dean Thomas is on Twitter and he thinks that the corner was justified. Brendan Schaub, I believe, also agreed. God knows we need that man's opinion more. But I mean, the point is like, it's fighters. With very few exceptions, I notice that it's fighters who agree with this decision. And I think there's a problem with MMA cornering across the board, that too many corners in MMA have a fighter's mentality. Because we always say the cornerman's job is to protect the fighter from himself or from herself. The fighter's mentality is in so many ways the opposite of the mindset that a trainer should have. The trainers in this fight were clearly thinking like, they said to Raquel Pennington, "We'll recover later," and it's like, she might not recover later. So the arrogance of saying that alone was a little annoying. But just saying like, "We'll recover later. We got this," blah blah blah, and it's like you are thinking as if you are in Raquel's position right now. You have to be thinking as somebody who is permanently outside the cage. You're not going to win or lose this fight. Your fighter might sustain serious damage. You need to not think like a fighter, think there's always a chance, and think about a cornerman who's trying to save their fighter, right? You have to be like the adult in that situation.
Well, you have to be the one looking out for your fighter's welfare because fighters are going to want to fight. Generally speaking, you are going to be the one who needs to be in position to save the fighter from themselves.
Yeah.
Like nobody prior to this fight had ever knocked Raquel Pennington for her durability, her toughness, or for her willingness to stick it out.
Of course.
One of
the things we mentioned last week as being like one of the things that would actually allow her to be in this fight.
When that fighter in the corner says to her corner that she's done, when she says she got nothing left, she's done, right? At that point, that should be a big warning sign to the rest of us that the fight is over. Right. And it was. And I think that's how all of us took it. The only people who didn't take it that way are a very small number of people who were apparently
think like fighters. Like,
yeah.
I think that the reason I bring that up is because I get the sense in boxing that there's more of a culture of trainers teaching ex-fighters how to be trainers. That there is, like, it's I don't think it's as good as it was a few decades ago when we had a lot of, like the decade in which Freddie Roach came up, when he was taught by Eddie Futch himself, like one of the greatest trainers of all time. It doesn't feel like we have quite as much of that. Maybe I'm just not seeing it or looking for it as closely, that we don't have. But there is still an idea of like an apprenticeship relationship where an old trainer who knows his business will teach the young ex-fighter, here's how you have to think differently now that you're on the other side of the ropes. Like, here is how a trainer thinks. You're no longer a fighter. You have to learn to have this sort of all-seeing, holistic view of how the fight is playing out, how your fighter's career is playing out, so on and so forth. In MMA, and maybe it's just because the sport is so young, corners are just ex-fighters, and it doesn't feel like there's a generation of older trainers teaching these people, like, listen, you have to look out for your fighter. You cannot be in there, because you know what I mean? Like, to get Raquel Pennington to the point where she's willing to say, I'm done. If Raquel Pennington wasn't actually feeling any of those shots, she would never have said, I'm done. And so her corner, who was thinking like they were in her position but wasn't feeling the shots, were like, we're not done. What are you talking about? We could still win this at any moment.
Here's the thing. Fighters quit all the time. Like, this may be a kind of an uncomfortable fact for some of us to admit, but fighters quit all the time.
Yeah.
Right? They quit mid-fight all the time. They give up on defending a takedown. They give up their back. They crumble under a flurry. The fighters give up all the time.
Yeah.
That's what is very rare is for us to hear a fighter say, and even more than that, like, a lot of fighters get to a certain point in a fight when it's clear that they're losing and they're like, okay, I'm just going to try to get out of here with my dignity intact and just get hit as little as possible and try to avoid engagements.
Yeah.
Like, this is not at all uncommon. Lots of fights play out like this. What is rare is for a fighter to, like, clearly have something break mentally or physically, and then to say, I'm done, and then for it to be overruled.
Yeah.
Like, she might, like, there was no getting away from Nunez. It was not going to get any better. It's not like she was getting completely, like, shit kicked, but that shouldn't be the threshold for stopping a fight. I think you and I and most people who watch a lot of boxing would agree that should be the threat, that should not be the threshold, is where you're bleeding and bloody and bruised and getting 10-8'd or 10-7'd every round. Like, it doesn't have to be criminal.
The threshold is when you're not in the fight. I mean,
Rick Glenn Gavin Tucker was criminal.
Yes.
It was criminal that fight continued.
Absolutely.
This was not criminal in that way, but that doesn't mean that our threshold needs to be, you should be indicted for manslaughter.
Yeah. The threshold is the fight's no longer competitive. That's it. Like, it's no longer competitive, and I'm now pretty damn sure it's not going to get competitive again. That's when you can think very seriously about stopping a fight. But both ethically and from a spectator's perspective, that is the only thing that makes sense. Because ethically, I don't want to see somebody hurt unnecessarily beyond what they've really signed up for. And
that's the crux of the matter, is what is necessary here.
Yeah.
Right? We learned everything we needed to learn about that fight from the first 4 rounds. Yeah. And I'm sure even the people who are going back and saying, oh, they didn't do anything wrong by letting her go out there. I don't agree with that. I understand the perspective. But nobody who is taking that perspective could look back at the previous 4 rounds of that fight, look at where it was going in the 5th and say, you know what, I really did think Pennington could have come back and won it in the 5th.
Yeah.
Or that there were questions left unanswered about the matchup.
Yeah, she was going to score her second career knockout after 4 rounds of having her ass beaten.
Yeah, I mean,
she was going to treat Amanda Nunez the way she did a 37-year-old Kim Couture.
Yeah. This is... We learned everything we needed to learn.
Yeah.
But, okay, so are there any takeaways? Takeaways for Pennington. She's a pretty good counterpuncher. I think we knew that beforehand. We can be even more sure of that now. She is a terribly deficient athlete at the upper levels of that division.
And she will be a rough matchup for almost any other woman in this division. Probably for a few more years, as long as this did not really take as much out of her as it possibly could have.
Yes, exactly. What did we learn about Nunez here? Because I do think we learned a few things about her.
Yeah, I think this was. I think last week I may have compared this to Joanna Rose too, as like, okay, now we really get to find out if Amanda Nunez is, And granted, she wasn't tested the same way that Rose was against Joanna in the rematch, but it's a lot easier now watching Amanda Nunes to feel confident that she has kind of sorted out the greater part of her stamina issues. That she's now capable of. I mean, there were even a few moments in this fight where she allowed herself to get a little wild, where she was like, "Okay, there's 10 seconds left in the round. I'm going to swing for 10 hard shots," and then she would just mosey back to her corner, smiling and getting her breath in through her nose before relaxing and resetting for the next round. She definitely looks to be mentally in a much better place to maintain a pace like this in future fights. So it seems like one of her biggest issues, one of her biggest hurdles has been successfully cleared at this point.
This was something that we talked about a little bit last week, was about how gassing in a fight is not so much about your activity, though activity is one component of it, as it is about your ability to remain calm while doing those things. Right. So it looks to me like that is the hurdle more than anything else that Nunez has managed to get over. Is it's not so much the activity. She was always willing and able to throw a lot. It's that when you start letting your shots go, you don't get out of control and you don't let your heart rate rise because you're getting overwhelmed with adrenaline. It's about controlling your adrenaline response to those situations and not letting that get beyond you. It looks very much like she's figured that out because she threw a lot of strikes in this fight.
And you could see it when she was taking shots as well. Like she was not she was shaking her head right after. I know everyone always says, "Oh, that means she got clipped." And yes, there were several times where Rocky did catch her with the right hand and Nunez would shake her head in response. But it also kind of says she knows she got hit and also she knows she's still okay. Yeah. She's replying to the shot that she took. She's defying it, which says a lot more than if her response to getting hit was to go nuts and tense up and throw 6 huge shots that don't land in return. Shaking your head no and just going back to business is an okay response in my book. It shows a certain kind of maturity or comfort.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've learned at this point that Nunez is never going to be a defensive mastermind.
Yeah.
She is a very much when she's attacking, and she will hit you back. She will counter, and she can hit some nice pullback counters, but her head is basically always going to be on the center line. And if you can reach her, you can hit her. If you throw more than one shot at her, you can hit her. If you exchange with her, you can hit her. The problem is she's also exceptionally tough. She hits really hard, and she's really fucking fast. So if you decide that's the route you want to go with her, then you're going to be in trouble. Again, I think there are fighters who I think can compete with her there, but it's basically Chris Cyborg.
There is fighter who can compete with her there.
There is a fighter, a singular fighter, and Valentina Shevchenko too. But I think we've seen that twice, and I don't think we need to see it again.
No, it's okay. That's fine. I did want to mention the defense at least briefly, though. I don't know if I did agree just then, but I'm now thinking about it I don't think ATT really teaches boxing defense all that well. It doesn't seem like it anyway. Joanna's been lacking for the head movement, and perhaps these are just fighters who just don't have those abilities to begin with. Because I'm sure there are ATT fighters that have better head movement.
Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah, well, even there, head movement isn't the main thing with him. It's the footwork. They teach very good footwork. But yeah, head movement, I don't know, seems to be lacking. Maybe that's just an MMA issue overall, though. But it does seem like Nunez does, if people are going to give her problems in the future, it's the hit ability is an issue, but toughness helps with that. The real issue is I think she has a lot of trouble transitioning from one to the other, from defending to attacking, from attacking to defending. When she was there feinting, she was trying to set Rocky up. She would get to that moment where you could feel, okay, now is when she's going to try and break the rhythm and throw a shot. And there were several instances where at that moment Raquel would just push forward off the fence and throw 3 punches, and many of them would land. And Nunez was not ready to counter, which is if you're sitting there with a pawing jab and feinting somebody who's cornered, you should expect them to throw and be ready to counter. That is one of the most likely reactions from a trained opponent, is that they're going to try to fight their way out of that corner. And she had a hard time of both avoiding the shots coming at her and thinking offensively at the same time. She either got out of the way and then couldn't fire back, or she got hit and then sometimes was able to fire back. So
I did a lot of thinking about this as I was watching this fight and and after the fight was over, trying to think of parallels for Amanda Nunez's game, because she is she's a rare fighter. in the kind of shocking gifts that she has, the skills that she has, which are not inconsiderable. She is a skilled fighter. And also the kind of glaring, obvious problems with her game.
Yeah.
Which have been present in some form for a long time, and are not really going to change. And I think the best comparison that I could come up with for her is Alexander Gustafsson, where they do particular things very well. They're extremely dangerous offensively, and defensively, it is and is always going to be a mess.
Leaves a little something to be desired.
Yeah, but like the difference is there are no women's bantamweights who can exploit that, who can exploit those flaws, whereas there are like 3 light heavyweights who can for Gustafsson.
Yeah, or you could also say like she's getting away with a game in this division that Kelvin Gastelum is using at middleweight in some ways, like great hand speed, good precise.
I did think a lot about the Gastelum comparison, but the difference is Nunez is so much bigger relative to her competition.
She got that reach. She's also comfortable pressuring an opponent when it makes sense to pressure them. We'll talk about that later.
So speaking of which, do we want to move on and talk real quick about Gastelum, Jacare, and a couple other fights?
Yeah. Why don't we? We'll finish off this segment with a quick little recap of Gastelum, Jacare. It was like better than the fight that I was kind of expecting. My thought was like, okay, Gastelum's he's going to do a really bad job of responding to Jacare's size and pressure, or like he did against Weidman, or he's going to clip Jacare on the chin, and Jacare is going to get tired more quickly than he ever used to, and that's going to be what decides the fight. And in fact, it was both things happening at the same time, and so it ended up being a very back and forth competitive fight from the first bell to the last. What did you make of it?
I don't think Jacare got robbed or anything like that, but I was really surprised at how effective he was even after he gassed.
Yeah, right. Me too. I mean, that to me is like one of the most sure signs of a really crafty veteran, a veteran that demands respect no matter who they're fighting, is he's clearly fatigued and the muscle memory's there. It really doesn't change anything about how he's fighting. He looks tired between the strikes, but when the moment comes to let a strike go or to counter or to defend, he's doing all those things just about as well as he was in the first round. He maintained his skill really impressively given the fatigue, I thought, because he was tired after the first round.
Yeah, I mean, he was tired 4 minutes into the first round.
Right.
Like we've known about Jacare for a long time that he can't fight at pace, and the biggest way that his age is showing is that the time that he can fight effectively is getting kind of less and less. Yeah. Like he's zombied his way through those last couple of rounds. But if he hadn't gotten knocked down in the second round, if that punch had just wobbled him as opposed to putting him on his ass, he probably would have won the second round and won the fight. And he came very close to winning the third round. Like that was very impressive. I mean, so I think what we can take from this, at least for now, is that Jacare is still at his age a top middleweight.
Oh yeah.
For Gastelum squeaked it out very impressively, dealing with what Jacare was throwing at him. He managed to absorb those shots somehow, which would have taken out most people. I mean, what did you take from this for Gastelum? Did you feel like we learned anything new here?
Yeah, no. Like that's the thing is like Gastelum looked exactly like himself, sometimes inconsistent, not doing nearly enough. Like when his opponent's attacking, he's like, well, maybe in the next exchange. And he'll do that for a full 4 or 5 minutes at a stretch. And he'll let the 1-2 go at long and mid-range. And yeah, like he's in my eyes the same guy he was before this fight, except now I have an even higher opinion of his chin, which I think really had a lot to do with how this fight played out. As you noted, if Gastelum's chin were anything like it should be, given his size relative to a guy like Jacare, then this would have been a very different fight. And Gastelum has his chin to thank for this victory in a lot of ways, I think. He was very hittable, Pat. Like he was, every single time they exchanged, whenever Gastelum would let a shot go, he was there to be hit afterwards. And Jacare took full advantage, like over and over and over, and Gastelum never adjusted. Like,
Jacare is a very accurate puncher and a sneaky accurate puncher, but Gastelum is also just horrible defensively. Like that was, and seems to be somehow getting worse.
Right.
That's
I thought he was. I mean, the size might be a difference maker, or I think he, in a lot of ways, like, it's just now that he's fighting bigger opponents and ones that are specifically comfortable pressuring that it seems like more of a glaring issue than it was. And in past fights, like, he was kind of able to get the fight he wanted without really having to force it. He was able to have this sort of in and out open space boxer puncher kind of matchup. Maybe that's it. But the man does not know how to defend his chin. Like, he does not move his head. He doesn't change levels. Something that's always bothered me about Gastelum, by the way, that he's short. He has this tremendous advantage that he can get under shots more easily than anyone else. And he barely bends his knees at any point during his entire fight. And it's also an issue that, like, since the days of his fight with Rick Story, he has had trouble with people who will throw combinations in the pocket because of these things. Like, Gastelum himself, I think, has gotten worse and more limited as a mid-range boxer. He's kind of like just a 1-2, it seems. But also, like, the head movement hasn't ever gotten better. The angles haven't ever gotten better. When you pressure him, he still backs up in straight lines too much. So it's like the same things that got him knocked down and very nearly losing that fight with Rick Story were an issue here against Jacare. The astounding thing is that he didn't really suffer any worse consequences when it was Jacare doing it versus Rick Story, which is insane.
Yeah. I mean, Gastelum's game is so frustrating because the talent is so obvious.
Right.
He's so freaking talented. Like, physically, the chin, the explosiveness, the power, the speed, the cardio, frankly.
He's middleweight John Dodson, dude. I mean, he's middleweight John Dodson. He's so frustrating. He just doesn't do anything that you want him to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say at this point. Like, I dearly hope that he gets some things figured out. And, probably the most likely scenario is that at some point late in his career, he's going to kind of put things together and go on this wild run and maybe get a title fight out of it or something. But, he may get a title fight now.
Yeah. He might have just lined himself up for it. I mean, the problem is that if we're thinking about what Gastelum might be able to do much later in his career, fights like this are going to make that stage of his career less and less likely. Like, this now is the time to start learning how not to get hit over and over and over again by the same exact counter right hand.
Yeah, seriously.
It's not really a good trend for a young developing fighter.
Yeah. Well, which brings us, I suppose, to McKenzie Dern.
Sure. Why don't we take a break, actually? And when we come back, we'll get into McKenzie Dern. We'll get into, all of that. We're also going to talk about John Lineker, I'm sure. We'll have to talk about Lyoto Machida. I want to give a little shine to Jack Hermanson. Still plenty of stuff from 224 to cover. We'll try to do that quickly next segment before moving on to Lomachenko and the rest. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Pat, you brought it up. McKenzie Dern. The weight cut did not seem to have affected her performance, which I don't know why people were expecting it to. It did strike me as quite odd after our episode last week that people were switching their picks when McKenzie Dern missed weight. It didn't really seem like she tried to make the weight that much to me. I wasn't really concerned about how she would show up. I mean, maybe you could assume, she didn't work hard, but like we all know, like this is just how McKenzie Dern really wants to be. She doesn't want to make weight, and so she didn't.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's what happened.
It's all fine. I mean, look, like, McKenzie Dern is wildly talented. The two things we know about McKenzie Dern is that she is wildly talented and that she just doesn't want to work that hard.
Yeah.
Like, it seems fairly clear. Like, that's you. this is not speculation the way it would be for a lot of other fighters. We have her saying she doesn't want to work that hard. We have her coach asking her to leave the gym because she didn't want to work that hard. We have her inability to make the weight. We have her physical appearance, which suggests that she's not trying that hard to get the weight off in the first place.
Right.
Like this is not idle speculation. She just doesn't want to work that hard. And that's fine. Like if she doesn't want to,
I don't want to work that hard. I mean, I sympathize.
Yeah, I mean, not all of us want to be like, Calvinist farm laborers, like, devoting ourselves to the pious material advancement for the sake of our relationship with God here. Like, that's not everybody. If McKenzie Dern wants to hang out on the beach and take pictures for Instagram, like, that's great. That's a fine thing for her to do.
Meanwhile,
but
Amanda Cooper breaking her back over the pea field, returns home to a sad soup dinner, calls her wife mother. Everything's just very Protestant and hardworking.
Exactly. This is for those of you who don't know, this is an extended riff on Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. So great sociologist, Max Weber.
Damn, I was riffing on something I haven't even heard about.
No, you have absolutely heard about this, just probably not from Weber himself.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
McKenzie Dern, Catholic heathen, lazy is what we're saying.
A lazy member of a lazy resident of the Antipodean continent.
Yeah, a decadent Roman, one of those kinds.
A papist, even.
A papist, yes.
Yeah. So leaving all that aside, maybe she doesn't want to work that hard, but she's also insanely talented. Yeah. She hits super hard. She's super fucking fast. She's tough. She has a mindset of somebody who isn't afraid to get hit in order to hit somebody back. Like, if she wanted to be, she could genuinely be a champion. Like, she could come close to it, depending on what kind of limitations shake out in her game, because she's very inexperienced. But like, she is talented enough to compete at an extremely high level. Mm-hmm. And her talent, maddeningly, as with Kelvin Gastelum, is just going to carry her through for like a lot longer than it would anybody else. Like, she's not going to have to work that hard. She could beat pretty much every flyweight on that tough cast just by being McKenzie Dern, and like kind of showing up and barely trying and like somehow like sliding in at 126 pounds. Like, she could just beat them because she's way more talented than they are. Even giving up size, even like with cardio that probably isn't great, she's talented enough to do that.
Yeah, if you want to get your the most bang for your buck as a promoter, you give McKenzie Dern to Rose Namajunas right now, so that you can hopefully get a Henry Cejudo turnaround out of her. Because I mean, it really shouldn't go that far, but it does look like she's in a situation where, if we expect her to take things more seriously, she's going to have to take an ass kicking. Like, it's easy for her. And that's why she doesn't really care to work that hard, I think. And doesn't really, like, she's just already good enough, as you said, to go a long way in this division. And she needs to learn that there is still more to do and more to learn and more to improve on. But, as far as the fight itself went, like, We talked last week about how one of the most impressive things about Dern's fight with, the last woman who was not Amanda Cooper. It was Ashley Yoder. Thank you, Wikipedia. Wikipedia should really sponsor this show, by the way. Her fight with Ashley Yoder, like, one of the things that really stood out was, boy, she does not really mind getting hit for somebody who has very little striking experience. People were still pointing out, like, oh, she doesn't like getting hit. Look, she was flinching and stuff like that. But, like, if you've never been punched hard in the face by someone who's trying to take your head off, like, just walking right into their range and flinching is you could do a lot worse as more or less a novice of the striking arts. And here, it looked like she was even more confident. Like, she was just going to step in and throw bombs, which is what she did against Yoder. She just happened to connect really, really cleanly on one. And, Cooper helped her out by reacting really, really badly to it. But, you don't need to have a ton of craft or skill as a striker if you are willing to pressure, you don't mind being hit, and you are throwing heat to back up your pressure. Like, if you have a really solid ground game to rely on, you don't even need to be that good of a takedown artist to make that game work at a pretty high level, at least, in some divisions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of fighters who know how to stick and move against an athletic, aggressive, hard punching pressure fighter
Right.
who can also submit you the moment the fight touches the ground, like that is a very limited array of fighters in MMA. This isn't boxing where everybody learns like basic footwork and a jab,
Right.
like kind of at the very beginning. That's kind of like mid-level stuff in MMA. Like those are mid-tier, mid-career skills that fighters develop. And a lot of fighters, even good fighters, never learn how to do that at all, period. So
it's about not about the specifics of her technique. It's about the process. She has a process that will work against a lot of opponents.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, so that's going to work for Dern for a while. But is there anything else we want to talk about on this card?
Well, I mean, John Lineker did the damn thing. I guess you might want to shame me for not having picked him, or for daring to suggest that he could possibly lose a fight.
It's not that you didn't pick him, Connor.
I did pick him.
It's because you did pick him. I know. I'm saying it's not that you didn't. It's not that you didn't pick him. It's that you doubted him, even for a second. That was the slander, Connor. That's what you should know.
I love that there's a community that's built up around listening to a show where the point is to analyze fights, and literally the process of trying to analyze John Lineker gets me in trouble.
Exactly. You have figured it out.
Yeah. But I also like going on Twitter whenever John Lineker wins and being like, hey, remember when TJ Dillashaw embarrassed him? So I like being the spoil sport as well. It's fun. Good times, y'all. Two things. Lyoto Machida knocking out Vitor Belfort was very, very sad up until the moment that it was surprisingly okay. Vitor retired. He'll almost certainly be back in like 2 months. But all things considered, I was extremely aroused by seeing Lyoto Machida do that to somebody. And I now want to see him keep fighting forever. Final point. I just want to give a little praise to Jacare Hermanson. We are talking about like distinctions between when's the right time to call it for your fighter and when isn't it, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of reasons behind what happened in the Jacare Hermanson fight that you would have to stop that contest. Hermanson broke a rib, I believe he said in the first round. He may have been mistaken. It seemed like it happened in the second when he was taken down. And was in obvious terrible pain. Was honestly like Mark Goddard could have stopped the fight, because as he was being mounted, his rib was being compressed and he was making noises. He was shouting out in pain, which can be considered a verbal submission. But Jacare Hermanson still wanted to win that damn fight and was still very much in there to win it. He was not close to giving up. In fact, when the third round started and his rib had been broken, I believe in the second, he came out with a flying knee because he knew if he was going to win this, he needed to do it as quickly as possible. So he instantly came out through a flying knee, almost landed on Talaslitis, went super duper hard for a guillotine as he was falling to his back after missing that knee, and then somehow managed to sweep, mount, and finish Talaslitis on the ground with what is now becoming some of the middleweight division's best ground and pound. And I just want to say Jacare Hermanson showed off some fucking guts in this fight, and it was awesome. It was a great way to get the early portion of the card started, so props to him for that.
Yeah, he's fun, man. He's really fun, like a homeless man's Dominic Cruz.
Hell yeah, absolutely. This is why I've been on the Hermanson train since he was signed, man.
Yeah, dude, he was a big-time prospect like 6 or 7 years ago, and kind of languished. Yeah, he kind of languished on like these mid-tier European cards for a while, and now has gotten to the UFC, and he's like 4-2 or 5-2 in the UFC. Like, good for him. He's going to be kind of a fringy top 15 middleweight.
He had like a fast Mousasi track where he just had to like learn to grapple, and then he did. Now he's pretty good at it. So now he's like Mousasi. Anyway, boxing happened this weekend, Pat. Vasyl Lomachenko fought Jorge Linares in a fight that, I'll admit, I kind of assumed would be just like any other Vasyl Lomachenko fight. I respect Jorge Linares. I know he's got fast hands. I know that he throws combinations well, and I like Cuban boxing, so I like a lot of the technical fundamentals of his game, but as a fighter, I have never been 100% sold on him. I've always been a little worried about his chin. Obviously, he cuts very easily. That's a thing that everybody knows about him. It's happened in many fights. And he's always just has this sort of, I don't know, lackadaisical inconsistency to his style. And he was really pushed by Vasyl Lomachenko. And maybe this was the key, that Lomachenko pushed Linares and forced a fight on him that most boxers can't, because Linares hits them with counters and they change their minds pretty quickly. When faced with an opponent as supremely skilled as Vasyl Lomachenko, Jorge Linares turned in what, as far as what I've seen of his career, was the performance of his career, and made for an incredibly competitive and entertaining fight, which is the first of that kind that Vasyl Lomachenko has had since he fought Orlando Salido. Everything else has just been enjoying his domination. This is the first time it's been like, wow, this person is competing with Lomachenko and making him fight to win.
So for me, looking at this, it was a combination of size, athletic ability, and game plan, right? It was all three of those things coming together for Linares to make this a tough fight and a tough night for Lomachenko. So he managed to stick Lomachenko for long periods of the fight at the end of his reach, which was, I think, 4 inches longer than Lomachenko's. So he managed to stick him outside. He threw straight punches. He worked the body a lot.
Very well.
So rather than trying to hit a thing that is very hard to hit in Lomachenko's head, he just went to the body repeatedly, over and over and over again. And that helped to slow Lomachenko's pace substantially. Like, we're used to seeing Lomachenko by about the 4th or the 5th round really unloading at a very, very high pace, unloading 20, 30 punches a minute. That did not happen in this fight until the very end. That did not happen until the 8th, 9th, 10th round. And even then, it was clear it was kind of hard for Lomachenko to pick his spots because he was worried, understandably, about the counter. But like, if Linares had been any smaller, less quick, I mean, he was real fast. He was throwing real heat.
His hand speed is astounding. He's the only person I've ever seen who appears to match Lomachenko's speed in the pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it took Lomachenko really breaking him down to get to the fight to the point where it could. Like, Lomachenko really had to work for it. Linares also did a great job of cutting off Lomachenko's escape angles by finishing his combinations with looping punches. He made it hard for Lomachenko to get out of danger.
Yeah. I honestly, I can't say enough good things about this fight. This was the crown jewel of the weekend for me. It was like thrilling action, just nonstop adjustments all the way through from both guys. I think you're right about size. Just to like go through what you've talked about, do you get the impression that this is sort of we're at the very least nearing the limit of how high Vasyl Lomachenko can go in weight?
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking about, because what I was trying to figure out, okay, who does Lomachenko fight after this? Right. So I was looking at kind of who are the other guys who are out there. Mikey Garcia fought his last fight at junior welterweight, but is going back down to lightweight. Yeah, because he had the experience in that move up that Lomachenko kind of had here, where he was like, oh, yeah, this is tougher than it usually is. Yeah, I mean, so I was thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, what does a fight with Mikey Garcia look like? And I think Lomachenko loses that pretty handily. You think so? I do, yeah. I think Lomachenko would lose a close decision. I think he'd lose about 8-4, about 8 rounds to 4, in that kind of fight. I just think Mikey Garcia. If you thought Linares could fight long, then look at Mikey Garcia working behind a jab and a 1-2. Like, Lomachenko would not be able to put the volume on him. And when they get into the pocket too. Mikey Garcia's counterpunching is not worse than Jorge Linares is. That's for sure. Well, and he's where Lomachenko eventually managed to get things going was in kind of these weird in-between spaces when they would get chest to chest, and Lomachenko would get real crafty and use an elbow to bump off and create space and use that to get an angle to land 3 or 4 punches. Mikey Garcia is about as good as you're going to find in those divisions at fighting that same kind of fight. Mikey Garcia is real good when you get in there and you're chin to chin, chest to chest, at finding ways to break off, create space, and take those angles. Lomachenko would not be able to do that with impunity the way he did to Linares. True. Yeah. Yeah, so you definitely like it. It gave me the impression. It was like watching Pacquiao against Margarito, a couple other examples, but I mean, the size disparity wasn't even that dramatic, but I might upset some people saying this. I hope not. But Lomachenko is not yet as good as Manny Pacquiao. That's just the truth. It definitely gave you the impression like, okay, these shots are landing with power. And Lomachenko, like at the moment he got dropped, that's something that happened in this fight. If you haven't seen this fight, by the way, I hope I've already convinced you to go watch it. Like, you will not be dissatisfied. It was really, really entertaining. And from a technical perspective, very intellectually fulfilling as well. There was so much to study going on here.
When Lomachenko got dropped, like he got dropped, like making a mistake he could have gotten away with against a lighter fighter, I think. He just sort of walked into range. He was about to step around the outside, like he was coming in behind a pawing jab, and Linares hit him with this picture-perfect inside angle right-hand counter, anticipating perfectly that outside bump that Lomachenko likes to do, that hard angle change he likes to push. And, it's like when just the feeling of how Linares feels comfortable standing in front of Lomachenko as he's pressuring and advancing. He's like, I can plant my feet and throw back at this guy. Compare that to how Nicholas Walters reacted in that famous instance that I've mentioned several times now, when Lomachenko literally stuck his chin out at him. He feinted with his shoulders and upper body, like leaned towards him and just walked at Nicholas Walters, and Walters shied away. There's just a different feeling when you have that kind of size advantage. And I think that did play a factor here. I think, too, though, like the body work, Linares also gave Lomachenko a much harder time than anyone else has pressuring. Like, he did not allow Lomachenko to pressure him for sustained periods. And this fight, more than anything else, makes it clear, like, that is what Lomachenko's best at, is pressuring. When he can force the fight on you, he's like TJ Dillashaw in the way that Dillashaw uses his angles. You know, Dillashaw's not at his best as like an evasive fighter. He's at his best when he's forcing you to react defensively. Like, you stop moving your feet because he's threatening you, and then he cuts an angle while you're defending.
Lomachenko is fundamentally a proactive fighter.
Right.
He is all about getting you to react and building layers off of your reactions. And he does that best when you are at a spatial disadvantage, when you're backed up against the ropes or close to the ropes, when your options are limited. That's when Lomachenko's are at their greatest, right? Because he takes your lack of options and turns that into a plethora of options for him to work with.
Yeah.
Different angles, different combinations, different approaches, can step into the clinch, can back up at range, can hit you with a triple jab.
Just different combinations alone is like a limitless number of options, because he can put his hands together in so many different and creative ways. Yeah. Uppercuts to body shots to head shots to short range to long range. Like, his punches flow like nothing when you are reacting to his initiative.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I mean, I think you're right that that's what he's best at. But so when you think about that spatially for a second, being at a size disadvantage is not so much about the muscle on the inside as it is about what 2 or 3 inches of reach does to your ability to pressure against somebody who knows how to use that, right? Like, think about all of the space in terms of volume that 3 or 4 inches of range takes away. Mm-hmm. Like, that is so much more space to cover when you're talking about fighters at this level with such extreme levels of skill. That's just a lot to make up. That's a lot of space that your opponent has to work with that you don't. And like that, I think more than anything else, it's not like Lomachenko did not get muscled around by Linares. When they got on the inside, Lomachenko was perfectly able to deal with Linares there. Mm-hmm. And I think he would be able to deal with a lot of lightweights when it comes to that. The problem was really how much volume and how much pressure that extra space took away.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, there's no questioning his infighting is good enough to hang with much bigger guys. Like, we know that Lomachenko used to wrestle. We talked, we specifically compared on this show his clinch fighting to that of like Jose Aldo. He knows what he's doing when the fighters are connected. Yeah, it has to do with bridging the gap, with getting into that kind of fight, and that is precisely the range at which Linares caught Lomachenko.
Yeah. And also because he's just not a devastating enough puncher,
right?
Like shot for shot to be able to fight at a substantially lower pace and make those shots count. Like, we saw what happened when he went kind of shot for shot with a heavier puncher here.
Yeah.
Like, Lomachenko needs to be outlanding guys that size about 1.25 or 1.3 to 1, in order to give himself the best chance of winning rounds in that when the other guy's shots are landing so much harder and so much cleaner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, but
crafty pro-ass performance from Linares, like absolutely something that I think he should take tremendous pride in, that he gave Vasyl Lomachenko this kind of fight, and to see Lomachenko get off the canvas and go back to work against such a challenging opponent and still get the job done and still look like Vasyl Lomachenko all the while, still use all of his old tricks. And, he just ran into more opposition, but he still looked phenomenal.
I mean, Lomachenko is the best pound-for-pound boxer on the planet. It's not – I don't think that should be controversial at this point. And he's one of the best pound-for-pound athletes too, because, in a sport where, as we talked about, the size thing is huge. His ability to read and adjust and find openings and just kind of fuck you up, in a whole bunch of different ways, that is very rare in sports, period. The ability to kind of read and adjust like that. It is unparalleled in boxing, and it's probably unparalleled in combat sports as a whole. There are very few guys on that level.
Athletically, he's one of those Roy Jones type talents where you watch him and I mean, there's a reason people use the Matrix comparison and stuff. It does look like he's operating on a whole different level of understanding. That he is, seconds ahead of his opponents when he's fighting them. Knows exactly what's happening and what will happen. So Vasyl Lomachenko still amazing. Jorge Linares gave him a hell of a fight. And it was awesome. And it also ended with a liver shot, which is always a nice way for a sensational fight to end with, everybody loves a good left hook to the liver. So after this, we'll probably won't have a ton to say. I know we're both extremely excited about next week's card. Demian Maia, probably the best of a bad situation as a replacement for Kamaru Usman, who was originally expected to fight Santiago Ponzinibbio for this main event. We'll also talk about Alexa Grasso, who is taking on Tatiana Suarez in a very interesting women's strawweight co-main event after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Final segment here. We're talking about Demian Maia, Kamaru Usman. As I said before the break, best of a bad situation, I think. I would have loved to see Usman Ponzinibbio. I don't know that it would have been a ton more competitive than this, but it is a matchup that feels like, we're setting something up for the future. These are newish fighters and not the ones of yesteryear. Demian Maia definitely doesn't fit that description, but as a late notice replacement for Kamaru Usman, who very rightly demanded a ranked opponent after Ponzinibbio pulled out. He said he was not going to accept another fight with somebody who wouldn't advance his career, which I totally understand. That's a line you have to draw sometimes very firmly when you are like a very good but very unpopular type of fighter. So, Maia filling in, it could have been a lot worse, I think, in terms of a meaningful matchup. What do you make of how this one should play out?
Well, I think this is an interesting fight. I think there are ways in which Usman is both more trouble for Maia than Colby Covington was and substantially less trouble. Because Covington basically outpaced Maia. That was essentially his whole game plan was, I'm just going to pretend that this guy can't hurt me at all, and I'm going to force the fight at a pace that he cannot keep, and I'm going to wear him out. Yeah. And that's a viable thing. He did that, it was ugly. It was real bad. Covington got hit with some of the slowest strikes I've ever seen anybody throw in an MMA fight in the third round there. There was this stepping left knee that Maia threw that somehow managed to connect that it was just, I don't even have the right adjective to describe how slow it was. It was fucking glacial.
With an arthritic left hand.
Yeah, I mean, these shots, you're like, how is anybody how are these shots landing? But with that said, the game plan as a whole was extremely effective.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. It worked perfectly. Now, Usman, I think, is a substantially better wrestler than Covington is. Covington is a good wrestler and has some pretty solid credentials to his name. Yeah. I think Usman is physically more overwhelming, much stronger, cuts more weight to get down, is just physically way more overpowering. and is even less likely to be taken down by Maia than Covington was. So he has that going for him. On the other hand, Usman is not as willing a striker as Covington is. Like, Covington just doesn't give a shit about getting hit, which, you know, is kind of, it worked for him here. That's probably going to get him in substantial trouble when he fights Rafael dos Anjos, which we'll talk about. But like, Usman is always thinking about his striking as he's doing it in ways that are not helpful.
How do you mean?
And so Usman has to like talk himself into it.
Oh, right.
You can watch Usman talk himself into either striking on the feet like he doesn't give a shit, like he did against Sergio Moraes, but you could see Usman like talking himself into it and like steeling himself to just go in there and throw shots. And then you can see Usman against like Emil Weber-Mek, who managed to hit him with some real good shots when that, in the brief stretches where that fight was on the feet. You could see Usman thinking to himself, like, do I really need to throw this, or can I get away with just shooting another takedown here?
Yeah, my man Luis used to say that there are two kinds of fighters. There are thinkers and doers, people who excel under different circumstances. And Colby Covington, it seems to me, is a doer and fights like a doer, where he's not processing these actions individually. He goes into the fight with an idea of how he's supposed to fight it. He maybe sometimes even ignores that idea once the fight actually starts, because like once the fight's happening, he's fighting. He is just, it's not quite autopilot. He's still making decisions, but he is just fighting. It's like a mode he gets into where he's just performing actions. And that's clearly not the case for Kamaru Usman. I'm still kind of hoping that at some point we'll see him, because the problem is that you can see it gives him some problems at times. Like, I'm not convinced that Kamaru Usman shouldn't be more of a doer and is maybe thinking too much for his own good in the fights, or if he's somebody who needs to be taught to be a better thinker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction to get at. For me, when I watch Usman, I really only see the thinking part come into play when he's striking at range.
Right.
The second that he is within grabbing distance of you, and this goes for his striking too. When he is within grabbing distance, suddenly his striking looks way cleaner. Right? Because he knows that the takedown is there as an option for him. Yeah,
because you can see he's not one of those. He's not like a shot takedown artist. I think that says something about the way he. I mean, he is. He can hit a great shot, but his chain wrestling is phenomenal, and so is his mat wrestling. His transitions when he's in contact with his opponent, that seems to be the real deciding factor into like when he's comfortable. Because at that point, it's clear he's not as much of a thinker. He's still thinking, I'm sure, still idly sort of planning what the next step might be and considering his options, but he flows like nobody's business once he's tied up with his opponent.
Yeah, then for this matchup, that has particular relevance because it means that if Maia shoots one of those terrible open space shots on him, Usman is going to punish him for that, right? Like, Usman is going to float his hips, grab a front headlock, and just land vicious shots over and over, then flip Maia over, let Maia kind of try to scramble with him, and Usman's hips are so strong that he will never find himself in trouble in those kinds of exchanges in the ways that, like, I mean, he might find himself in trouble, but I really don't think so. I think he could very safely grapple with Maia from a position of strength in ways that basically nobody else in this division could.
Yeah, but it does also mean he does have to fight the fight with Maia that I sort of mistakenly assumed Colby Covington would fight with Maia, where he is actually going to have to grapple him to. I mean, it's not like it's impossible that Usman couldn't knock Maia the fuck out. I mean, that's eminently likely. Yeah. And it's not like Maia normally has that kind of high-paced striking battle, so he's not maybe going to be bringing it to Usman. It was Covington who brought it to Maia, so it might be fine either way. But
this is what makes this an interesting fight, right? Yeah. Is there's a chance that like Covington's plan to draw out Maia and make him throw and make him work, that is what led directly to Covington getting blasted the way he did with those shots, and a more thinking man's approach on the feet, like what Tyron Woodley did versus Damian Maia, that maybe if Usman takes that approach and he just stops and very clearly and very slowly thinks things out, is going to be enough for him to kind of like safely outland Maia without putting himself in trouble, make Maia shoot those bad shots.
That's true.
Then briefly punish Maia when he shoots, and then get back to this kind of slow-paced kickboxing where Usman's tendency to think is not a deficiency for him.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm definitely not under the impression that Usman couldn't win the same kind of fight Tyron Woodley won.
Yeah.
He could do exactly the same thing and probably have similar success unless Maia really did try to overwhelm him. But again, like that's not really Maia's speed. And he as like a 90-year-old man at this point, much like Jacare, has to be concerned about his gas tank, which is like there's a serious limiting factor on how willing he even is to start that kind of fight. Because, it gets him tired really quickly compared to his younger years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard not to pick Usman, right? No matter how the fight plays out, it's like it just feels like there are too many advantages in his corner. Maia's advantage going forward, more and more, he is limited to his advantage being his skill. And there, like we saw with Pennington and Nunez, there is a limit on how far skill alone can take you. And he's now getting to the point where just being a big welterweight is no longer that much of a factor either.
You could see the kind of physical disparity between him and Covington, where like Maia's old man strength, like Covington is not a big welterweight at all. Yeah. Covington is in fact kind of a small welterweight. And Maia has gotten to the point where he is so old that even that size differential was not enough whenever they locked up, right? Usman, on the other hand, is a huge welterweight who cuts a lot of weight and never seems to suffer for it. And like even by the standards of big welterweights, Usman is freakishly fucking strong. So
God, he's 6 feet tall.
Yeah,
I thought he was shorter than that.
No, he's built like a small welterweight.
Yeah, he's built like a much shorter, stockier man. Except he's apparently
he's
not
6
short.
feet tall and doesn't he have like a 75 or 76 inch reach too?
Let's see, 76 inches. You are correct. I mean, goddamn.
Yeah, so I think that's just going to be too much for Maia to deal with. I think the most likely scenario for the fight is that it starts off very slow and very deliberate. Usman gets hit with some shots that he doesn't see coming, but slowly manages to kind of pick things off, forces Maia into some bad shots. And the second that Maia is taking those bad shots, I think the fight is more or less over.
Yeah, and I think it is. It does. I'm getting to the point where I think Usman's chin is not really a problem. It's always still in the back of my mind when you have like a really impressive fighter who tends to just dominate everybody, but you're always thinking of those couple early fights where it's like, remember that time he got clipped and staggered by a shot that didn't look like it should have staggered him? It's starting to feel more like those probably had more to do with his inexperience and tension with which he was receiving those shots than it does a bad chin. But Damian Maia did land some good shots on Tyron Woodley. Like, Maia's always been, K1 Maia has always been better at K1ing than people have actually, like, unironically given him credit for.
Well, late career Maia is a shockingly skilled kickboxer.
He landed some good shots on Rory McDonald when they fought. People remember him getting exhausted and having nothing except when he was on the ground early, but he was hitting Rory quite successfully. He probably landed the much better shots than Colby Covington in their fight until he got tired. And despite it going nowhere, he landed a shockingly, like rewatching it, a shockingly high percentage of left hands against Tyron Woodley too. Yep. He's so like if he can push some kind of pace, Maia can, make Usman fight a fight that maybe he doesn't want to. I'm never willing to fully count a guy like Damian Maia out, but it is hard to imagine all of the advantages on Usman's side of the scale not being significant here.
Yeah, I'm there with that.
Yeah.
So we got one more fight we wanted to talk about from this card. Yeah, I think Usman because is this a 5-rounder or is it because it's a late notice a 3-rounder?
Good question. I assumed it was 5 rounds.
If it's 3 rounds, I think it's a decision. If it goes into the 4th and the 5th, I think a late TKO by Usman.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I'm saying nothing that indicates that it's not a 5-rounder still. And Maia did step in with about 4 weeks ago, so maybe that's enough time, but probably not realistically, which is why, 4th round TKO sounds about right.
Yeah. So we have one more fight we wanted to talk about: Alexa Grasso versus Tatiana Suarez.
Yes,
very interesting strawweight fight.
I agree. 2 women that you and I have both been interested in at numerous points over the last year or two. Obviously, Alexa Grasso came into the UFC with a lot of hype behind her as this really talented striker. She has faltered in some sort of frustrating and strange ways. It's a little difficult to get a bead on where her career is actually headed at this point. Certainly not ready to write her off yet, but she has run into some obstacles stylistically that she seems to be struggling to get over. And then Tatiana Suarez, who won, whatever season of Tough it was, somewhere between 1 and 29. How many are they on now?
Tough, who gives a shit? I believe this was the one from 2016. So she looked real good. She's very talented. She was a world level wrestler, right? A world level freestyle wrestler. I don't think she wasn't on an Olympic team, but she did compete at the World Championships. I believe she was a bronze medalist at the World Championships.
She was probably going to be an Olympic athlete, I believe, and then was diagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Yes. Beat the cancer, gave up on wrestling and took up jiu-jitsu, and has now taken up MMA. She had a terrible shoulder injury right after winning the Ultimate Fighter, which kept her off the sidelines for about a year and a half. She returned last November and beat the crap out of Viviane Pereira, generic Brazilian strawweight, and now finds herself matched up with former hot prospect Alexa Grasso. So what do you make of this, Connor? What are the dynamics of this matchup we need to be looking out for?
So let's see. What's given Grasso problems in her recent fights? She has had a hard time with genuinely just being countered on the feet. Seems to really change the way that she approaches striking exchanges. That was a big issue against Herrig. I remember it being an issue in spots against Marcos as well, that you give Grasso something to worry about and she will become more reactive. She'll stick to her safer weapons and not really try to put her stamp on any particular moment of the fight from that point forward. That's a bit of an issue. A really big issue relevant to this matchup is her tendency to get backed up to the fence. And more than that, the lack of urgency she shows in getting away from the fence once she's put there. She's perfectly willing to accept a Muay Thai clinch or an underhook and just kind of wait it out and maybe try to land a few strikes from that position. She'll even back up and try to counterpunch off the fence. And, there are a lot of openings for Alexa Grasso in a matchup like this because Tatiana Suarez, like McKenzie Dern, it's really a lot more about the process of getting to her kind of fight than it is about the specifics of how she does it. Her striking is not good. It's just not good. It hasn't been. I have not seen it look good once yet. She really just kind of rushes forward and looks for the takedown, but she's huge, she's strong, and she is a really skillful chain wrestler, especially on the mat. Like that, the most impressive thing about that Viviane Pereira fight was she just crawled all over Pereira on the ground. She was like, okay, north-south, side control, mount, side control on the other side, back to north-south. It's just nonstop.
So I'm watching a sequence from this fight right now. It's kind of at the beginning of the second round. Suarez shoots what should be just a god-awful shot, right? Like, just terrible. But because Suarez is so big and so long, and Pereira immediately sprawls out, right? She does exactly the right thing and sprawls out. Because Suarez's arms are so long, because she's so tall, she manages it, and her legs are so long, she manages to, without her hands connected together, she's just barely kind of reaching around Pereira's leg. She manages to step her left leg over and turn that into a body lock. Stand up and turn that into a body lock. She's so strong, her hips are so strong, and she just manages to turn that into a takedown and kind of slams Pereira to the mat.
Yeah, she uses her legs really well to finish. There's another takedown in that fight where she hooks onto a single leg, and Pereira's like, she's bouncing on one foot way out of range. And Suarez just covers that distance. She just uses those long arms, sucks the knee into her chest, easily steps behind the leg, and dumps Pereira right away.
Yeah, just freakishly strong. So she really has great drive. Like, if you wanted to put this in terms of like wrestling, scouting, or whatever.
But also she has great octopus limbs.
Yeah, great drive. She's a great finisher. She's a great chain wrestler. She really is like a world championship level wrestler. Yeah. And she combines that with like viciously good ground and pound and just groundwork in general. So if Grasso is not proactive about creating space and maintaining it, if she's not proactive about immediately trying to find opportunities to get off the fence and get up when possible, if she doesn't feel comfortable sitting down on combinations and really punctuating things when she has the fight where she needs it to be, then she's going to get out wrestled. I think she's probably going to get out wrestled, not grappled here.
Yeah, it's again, it's not that It's not that she's not going to be able to hit Suarez. It's not that she's not going to get several minutes of the kind of fight she needs. It's that I don't really trust Grasso at this point to do the right thing with those precious moments. I don't really trust her to make the right decisions, especially under pressure. And if Suarez is smart, she will come into this looking to take the initiative and keep it for the duration of the fight. Always have Grasso on the reactive. Always have her wondering what you are going to do next. Once you, as a really powerful wrestler, like once you get that sort of dynamic into your opponent's head, then it can be really, really challenging to turn the fight around.
And there is nothing about what we've seen from Suarez to this point that suggests she is not going to take that approach. Right?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Like you're right about the pointing to the larger kind of strategic aspects of Suarez's game. Like, she's a willing striker. She's perfectly willing to go out there and throw in order to set up her takedowns.
Yeah.
She is perfectly willing to eat a shot if necessary. She doesn't appear to be afraid of that. She's tremendously fast. So, like, the amount of danger that she's actually in at range tends to be pretty limited before she gets the fight to the space where she wants it to go. And, like, it is entirely possible that Grasso will just come out and be like, oh, yeah, this is the prospect we all know. But up until we see her fight, frankly, with a little more confidence and a little more chutzpah, it's hard to do that. Like, she's won 2 of her 3 UFC fights, right?
Yeah.
Like, but
even a little more like maybe desire is the right word. Like, I don't know. It just kind of feels like she just doesn't really care that much. Like the fight with Felice Herrig, she was like, you know, her famous reaction to the decision being announced was like, oh well. And then she comes in overweight and wins a split against Ronda Marcos. Like,
her whole UFC career has been pretty lackadaisical.
Right, exactly.
And it's not that she isn't capable of more. We know she's capable of more, right? Like, and we've seen really one of the things that kind of defined her on the regionals was she had great killer instinct. You know, like she got after it, and we have not seen that from her in the UFC. I don't know why that is. I don't know what's going on. I don't know her coaching situation. I don't know her gym. I don't know her personal life, but you know. Let's hope she shows off a little more, because it's not like this stuff about her being a top prospect came out of nowhere. Like, she had a track record against good competition as a lower level fighter that pointed to her being something kind of special. And, you know, it's just bizarre that has not been the case here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she deserved and still does deserve all the hype she got as an up and comer. She just has kind of faltered, and it's essentially we have a fight where the person who wins it is going to be the one who takes the fight to their opponent, is sort of the feeling. And I really trust Tatiana Suarez to do her best to do that. And I don't know, like, I almost trust that Alexa Grasso's response to Suarez's commitment is going to be the opposite of, okay, now I'm not going to take the fight to my opponent. So I feel strangely confident that Suarez has this one in the bag, given how high I was on Grasso when she first got signed.
Yeah. Is there anything else on this card you want to point to, Connor, as we wrap up here?
Yeah, not really. Dominic Reyes is fighting Jared Cannonier, so that'll be cool. Jared Cannonier, speaking of like Alexa Grasso's incredible inconsistency, Jared Cannonier has also like really run the gamut of makes you think he's ready to maybe turn a corner and become a contender, and then he just does nothing for a whole fight. So, but Dominic Reyes is super exciting and is a knockout machine. He's going to be in there against a guy who is almost impossible to knock out. So that will be a lot of fun, I think. Other than that, that's the next UFC card, and there's more of them after that, would you know? Next week, we'll be coming back and recapping this one. We'll be talking also about the following weekend's card, which is main evented by Darren Till versus Stephen Thompson. That's one that a lot of people are excited for. So looking forward to talking about that one. Makwan Amir Khani is coming back then, too. Holy shit, I thought he died. I really thought he was gone forever.
Wait, who now?
Yeah, Mr. Sweden. Don't you remember?
No, I do not.
Mr. Denmark, was it? I can't remember. But he's on that card. So we'll be talking about that with y'all next week. And until then, thank you for joining us. Before we go, real quickly, what do we have coming out this week, Pat?
I have a new episode of Tides of History looking at the Reformation, talking about kind of the background to the Reformation, about Martin Luther himself, and then about the kind of conflagration that emerged as a result of the Reformation.
I hope you did not include that word in the script.
Conflagration? I did not.
Good call. It's a tough one. As for me, working on a Lomachenko piece right now. I think it's going to be real fun. It's a fight, one of those fights where like I'm just having fun researching and finding the examples because it's just super enjoyable to watch again and again. So keep your eyes out for that. And that's about it. So until next time, make sure you find us online, social medias, twitter.com. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman. I am at BoxingBush, BUSCH. You can find us both on Facebook.com/either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Rebush MMA. You know how it goes. Tell your friends, recommend the show, support us on Patreon, do all the stuff that as a good fan you are obligated to do, and we will keep on appreciating it. And until next time, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.